Hey guys, what's up? I'm CJ and welcome back to my galaxy. Today we are talking about the Hunger Games once again. Yes, I am officially back with Hunger Games content. Since the movie Sunrise and the Reaping is coming out in November, I'm going to be making a lot more Hunger Games content than usual. I'm thinking at the moment 2 uploads a week, possibly more if you guys really want some Hunger Games content. Depends on what you guys think and what you guys want from my channel. But today we're talking about the real downfall of the Capitol. And essentially what the real downfall of the Capitol is treating their tributes as human. And essentially how I'm going to prove that this is like the real downfall of the Capitol is by going through the evolution of the games and how the tributes were treated, because in the original trilogy and the 2 prequels, you can actually see quite a big difference between how the tributes were treated. And Suzanne Collins actually pointed out, like, quite obviously to the readers. So we're going to go through that and basically the meaning and of all of the treatment and how that resulted in the Capitol eventually falling. All right, so let's start with the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. The 10th Hunger Games is where we're sitting at the moment. I have a couple of notes in here. I'm going to be reading out a couple of quotes as well. I haven't read quotes on my channel for quite some time. Usually it's just me using like broad evidence, because quotes take quite a long time to come up with for my YouTube channel, and the outlines for these videos already take ages to do. So quotes come up when I'm trying to be like really serious and trying to prove something to you guys. Like I'm trying to persuade you of this topic today. Okay, so starting with the 10th Hunger Games, we see both in the movie and in the book how the tributes are treated. It's quite similar how it's portrayed in both forms of media. The tributes are carted around like literal cattle, literal animals. They get put in train cars that are filled with, I think it's filled with like hay and straw or whatever, and they don't have like beds, they don't have any sort of food or water, and it's basically for the first time in the 10th Hunger Games, Snow, he shows up when the trainer arrives with all of the tributes in them. They're carted out by peacekeepers like animals, they're all chained up together, and Snow's at the train station for the very first time. He arrives and with the tributes, and he's like shipped off with the tributes, and they're dumped in a literal zoo. Like they're literally animals on display. They still don't get food or water provided by the Capitol themselves. The only reason the 10th Hunger Games is kind of like strung out for so long is because so many complications happen. Usually for the first 9 Hunger Games, they actually ended up just shipping them straight into the arena and watching them die within like a day or 2. So there was no point in them giving them food or water, at least the Capitol didn't see any point. So it's actually the Capitol mentors that end up giving the tributes food and water so they can survive to the arena. And that's only because each of these mentors are trying to get their victor to win, or their tribute to become the victor, because it means that they get some award that Snow very much wants as well. So the only person who's really treating them and like the tributes not as animals is Sejanus, because he doesn't, like, he is district and he understands that they're literally human. Just because they're like dehumanizing them doesn't mean they're not actually human, which obviously prompts Snow to treat Lucy Gray as human as well. Like Snow has an awareness during the prequel that Lucy Gray is human, but what separates her is that she's not necessarily district. That's something that he really drives home in the prequel, is that she's not district, because she was actually coincidentally outside of District 12 when, like, the Covey was outside of District 12 when the Dark Days were happening and everyone was like put into districts and isolated from each other. They didn't actually, and they weren't supposed to end up there. So Snow convinces himself that they're not animals like the rest of the district. Lucy Gray is different. She's actually human, unlike the district animals, the rest of the tributes, especially Sejanus's tributes, like Marcus as well. Marcus, who ends up literally like hanging in the arena because he's dehumanized in the way that they're like putting him on display. He's not a real human. He's an animal there just for the Capitol's entertainment. It's not until Snow actually ends up in District 12 as punishment that he begins to think of tributes or as district people as truly truly animals that the capital needs, which is the capital essentially is making sure that these people who seem to act like humans aren't actually going to become animals. Dr. Gall essentially puts the idea of humanity undressed in Snow's head and makes him think of the districts as animals who need the capital to control them to make sure they don't become inhumane and make sure they don't become very animalistic in their actions. In The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, Dr. Gall says this: "What happened in the arena? That's humanity undressed. Tributes, and you too, how quickly civilization disappears. All your fine manners, education, family background, everything you pride yourself on, stripped away in the blink of an eye, revealing everything you actually are. A boy with a club who beats another boy to death. That's mankind in its natural state." At the end of Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, Snow actually goes back to Gaul and the capital and discusses the topic again. And Snow describes citizens as creatures who need the capital to survive. Throughout the first prequel, Snow is frequently comparing districts to animals and how obviously the capital is the reason the districts don't become animals, because they're closer to that animalistic nature than the capital citizens are, because capital citizens have been brought up with like wealth, and they have their family manners, they have their family background, they have all of that, and they're supposed to be these rich kids compared to like poverty and of the districts, especially after the Dark Days. There's a difference between them, and it's the way that they were raised. And the capital knows how to raise people like that. So obviously the districts don't know how to act like that because they weren't raised like that. So the capital needs to control the districts. So the 10th Hunger Games are essentially a turning point where the Hunger Games becomes entertainment. But at that point, tributes are still animals. They're not like lesser humans. They're literally animals in a zoo. And they're not treated as equals at all. They're just literally animals behind the glass that the capital citizens can go and gawk at. Moving on to Sunrise on the Reaping, and I have quite a few like sticky notes. I'm not going to go through all of them. I have a couple of things written down that I want to mention as quotes for this one. I was very surprised in reading Sunrise on the Reaping that there wasn't that much of a jump between the two prequels. There's quite a large amount of time between the 10th Hunger Games and the 50th Hunger Games, especially compared to the 25 years between the 50th and the 75th. You would assume that there'd be much bigger of a jump in, say, like technology and the way in which they treat the tributes. And there is a bit of a jump, and we're going to discuss that. But it's actually very surprising that they're still treating the tributes as animals when you get to the 50th Hunger Games. They're not human. They're not less than human. They're animals. Haymitch actually describes to us what's going on throughout Sunrise and the Reaping, and he is an incredibly detailed narrator. Very stark difference from Katniss. Katniss notices very different things to Haymitch, which I found so interesting. Things go from bad to worse when the water is replaced by a noxious soapy spray that triggers my gag reflex and burns my eyes like pepper dust. We find out about a page later that it's actually insecticides that they were sprayed with. They were sprayed with literal chemicals to get rid of all of the bugs, which is what Proserpina mentions to us when she's about to begin like styling all of the District 12 tributes. They're literally trying to get rid of bugs, assuming they're like animals. And I find this next quote really interesting when Proserpina and I think his name, you know when you read names and you think to yourself, I don't know how to pronounce it and how to just say it out loud. I think his name is Vetus and Proserpina, the stylists of District 12. When Proserpina is essentially discussing with Haymitch whether or not to leave his nails and to not file them down, Haymitch requests to keep them to make sure he can fight with. And Proserpina says, "You might need your claws." And Haymitch, in response in his internal monologue, states, "I wonder if she thinks of my nose as a snout, my hair as fur, my feet as paws." Haymitch here even points out literally that they see them as animals. Like, they use insecticides, they're using descriptions for the tributes that like literally reflect animals. That's like, it's still very similar to Songbirds and Snakes. So they have this essentially separation from what's going on for the tributes and what's going on in the capital. Like, they're completely different entities. They're not the same race. They're not all humans. And in separating that, they're able to essentially disconnect themselves from watching literal kids die. It's essentially like watching National Geographic for them. You watch a baby bird die on National Geographic in a documentary and you're sad, but it doesn't really affect you that much. It's the circle of life. It's not humans. It's not like us. You're not watching like a little kid die on TV. You're watching just an animal, and that's how natural things are. Like, animals kill each other, just like the tributes are killing each other in the Hunger Games. So in Sunrise and the Reaping, the descriptions and comparisons to the animals just get even worse. And throughout, once Haymitch wins the games, the descriptions they get even worse from the beginning of the novel. Not even just in comparison to the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It gets worse in comparison to the beginning of the novel, where Proserpina was saying that Haymitch has claws. I find this quote to be probably the craziest thing I read in that's actually such a big exaggeration. The craziest thing I read in Sunrise and the Reaping? No. The entire novel is insane. I just think it's a crazy thing to do for a tribute, and it just really points out like the way in which the capital separates themselves from the districts to make sure that they are able to be like, we're superior as people, because like the districts are just a different breed entirely. It's like comparing, like I said, it's like comparing National Geographic. Honestly, it's like comparing Homo sapiens to Neanderthals almost. Okay, so here's a quote from Haymitch's inner monologue, and he's describing post games, after he's the victor, how he's acting and how he's being treated by the capital. The after party's held in the ballroom of the presidential mansion. I'm displayed in a giant golden birdcage that dangles from the main chandelier at about eye level. It's supposed to be a joke, I guess. The guests sure seem to get a kick out of it. But it isn't. When I try the little handle at the door, it's locked tight. So Haymitch is once again literally an animal in a zoo. This time he's a bird. He's not in a literal zoo like the tributes were in the 10th Hunger Games. It's been upgraded to some glamour, and the capital citizens are actually able to go up to Haymitch and interact with him, feed him food, which they do, and they have this relationship with the victor that they didn't have in the 10th Hunger Games. So we're starting to see some development of the capital citizens having a relationship with the victors, and I'm sure a lot of them were like sponsors for Haymitch as well during the games, so he gets to interact with his sponsors rather than the tributes just receiving food and water in the games like for the 10th Hunger Games. Overall, Sunrise and the Reaping, they're still very much animals. They're not humans. They're not sort of subhumans, like I said. They're being treated as a separation from capital to district. And I'm going to use Catching Fire as the best example for this because, you know, it's the original trilogy. There's 3 books. So I wanted to focus on where I found the most evidence from, which obviously is Catching Fire, where they're interacting the most with the capital citizens. It becomes parasocial with the capital citizens and the district victors by the time we get to Catching Fire. And it is very different. The 25 years between the 50th and the 75th, like, huge differences happened. Like, an entire new generation of capital citizens grew up and started watching the Hunger Games as entertainment, and suddenly there is an incredibly strong parasocial element to the games. There's even one point, and I believe it's during I don't have this bookmarked, I only have like one quote marked in Catching Fire, but I believe before the interviews, Katniss is discussing with like Haymitch or whoever that essentially what the victors are trying to do is convince the game makers to not go forward because the capitals, they love their victors, which is something that is like literally said by Haymitch, which I'm pretty sure it's Haymitch, but it's like true. Like Effie in the movie, Effie is very moved by what the victors are saying, and it's in a whole ordeal where just capital citizens are very attached. They have their parasocial relationships, and I want to discuss why they have parasocial relationships and where the downfall, the slope started and why it started. So this next quote is from Katniss in her inner monologue. This is from the very beginning of Catching Fire, right before the victory tour happens. Cinna started to call to work on my talent. Every victor is supposed to have one. Your talent is the activity you take up since you don't have to work either in school or your district's industry. It can be anything, really, anything that they can interview about. Peter, it turns out, actually has a talent, which is painting. He's been frosting those cakes and cookies for years in his family's bakery. But now that he's rich, he can afford to smear real paint on canvases. I don't have a talent, unless you count hunting illegally, which they don't. or maybe singing, which I wouldn't do for the Capitol in a million years. So we can see that the Capitol is really pushing for a relationship with the victors after they've won. And it's actually something that's not in the movies, which I find really interesting, but it's something that really should be, because we see it. I'm going to discuss another bit of the interviews as well in a minute, because that's like another piece of evidence. But here in like, it's a really big piece of evidence that like the Capitol doesn't want to let go of their victors in the 75th Hunger Games, because like they have watched them grow these talents and they've watched them really develop as people over the years. So they have like this real like relationship in a way with their victors that they just don't want to see end. So when Snow obviously prevents the Quarter Quell to essentially get rid of the hope that Katniss and Peeta gave the districts to for a rebellion, it means that the Capitol citizens would also suffer and start to realize, hang on, there's something wrong with this. Like, we've seen these people survive and we've grown attached to them. Like, why do we have to let go of them when you said that we can like see them as entertainment? And then all of a sudden it has this like slippery slope of, oh, they're actually people who we've been watching and growing for these years. How are we supposed to just watch people that we see as humans and just die? By giving the victors a talent, they literally ended up making them seem more human, which now you have to watch humans kill each other in an arena just because they're district. No, like they're humans in the same way that the Capitol citizens are, because I'm sure the Capitol citizens saw, say, like Peeta baking and painting, and they went, yeah, let me like take up painting just like Peeta Mellark, the victor, like my favorite victor. You know what just crossed my mind though? What was Haymitch's talent? Did they force him to have a talent, or did they see him and go, no, that man, just ignore him for the rest of it? Like, there's no way Haymitch was functioning enough for a talent. Katniss says that they're supposed to have a talent. I'm saying that Haymitch was supposed to and they just gave up. The relationship that Snow created between Capitol and District using this talent that we only see in the books, it definitely should be in the movies. But anyway, it really boils over once you get to the interviews. And we all know the infamous line, "If it weren't for the baby," from Peeta Mellark himself, because he knows how to manipulate a crowd of Capitol citizens. Suddenly, and it's kind of ironic that they see the baby more as human than the people they're sending into their arena, but that's a whole different conversation that we need to talk about. That's like a real life situation that Suzanne Collins has put in there as a theme. But as I was saying, they're literally seeing them as humans in the interviews. That's why they're using that emotional connection. Each victor in their interview, they're saying something that connects the Capitol citizens. Like Finnick has this like little love letter to Annie that the Capitol citizens can take as a love letter to themselves. Or like Peeta, Katniss, like they're all using, I think, in the movies, and I don't remember if this happens in the books, but Joanna's like yelling at the screen. Beetee says something that's smart, like surely this law can be unwritten, and they are trying to connect emotionally to the Capitol citizens because they know that they have that emotional connection there. And obviously they actually end up having to turn off the live coverage of the interviews because the Capitol citizens like start getting so angry about it after Peeta says that there's a baby on the way with Katniss. Their victors that they see now as real human beings, they're being sent away to an arena and they can't do anything about it, which is literally Snow's downfall because he's done this to himself. And I just wanted to add, like during the victory tour, instead of like being locked away in a birdcage like Haymitch was post games, like they literally have Katniss and Peeta freely interact with Capitol citizens. There's a point in time where Katniss and Plutarch are dancing. They're very much able to interact with citizens. They're able to interact with sponsors. They are amongst like people, like they see them as human. They're subhuman. They're definitely seeing them as like lesser, more inferior to the Capitol citizens. They weren't raised with like wealth and with manners in the same way, like you see with Effie saying that like that manners are very important to her throughout each of the books. So the districts aren't exactly equal, but they're not animals by the time we get to the original trilogy. The 75th Hunger Games, it's so different because the Capitol has been able to freely interact with their victors. They've been able to create a parasocial relationship and they become connected to these people because they've seen them grow, like I've said like so many times already, they've seen them grow as humans, and there's one point in the movie where we see that Snow's granddaughter actually braids her hair like Katniss. So they pick up on habits that these other human beings have, because like they can do them too, because they're all human. They interact with the world in the same way. The issues start with the Hunger Games when the capital citizens see that these human beings who they have grown alongside are being sent to their deaths in an arena. That's literally the last Hunger Games. Well, unless you count like the 76th Hunger Games for the war, but it's not like a legit Hunger Games. The Quarter Quell was the last official games between with just the district tributes, because the capital citizens finally saw Snow and the game makers as inhumane. As soon as the capital citizens started to disagree with it, all of a sudden they couldn't justify watching humans die as entertainment anymore. I just find it amazing how much of a stark difference there is between the 10th Hunger Games as well as the 50th Hunger Games all the way to the 75th Hunger Games. Even then, like, they're treated, like, Katniss and Peter have, like, an abundance of, like, luxurious food, and, like, they have rooms. District 12's in the penthouse. They have just their own, like, room service, I think at one point is described by Katniss, and they have all of this ability to experience luxury that Haymitch didn't experience during his first games. It wasn't until he was mentoring people that he was eating like better food. And honestly, that was probably because of Maisie Donna that they started doing that. But even as tributes, they're no longer like being watched through bars at a zoo. The tributes are trapped, like they're imprisoned in the capital, but they're being placed in apartments where you'd put people if you were moving them. Like you wouldn't put them in a zoo. When Katniss and Peter literally just, they live as people until they end up in the arena to fight to the death. So the real downfall of the capital is the evolution of the Hunger Games and treating their tributes as humans. But that is it for today's video, guys. If you liked, please like and subscribe, and comment down below what you think of this theory. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have more evidence for me that you want to add to this video? Let me know in the comment section down below. Once again, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, but I've been CJ, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!